And welcome to the next edition of Atomic Ergo. As always, I'm your host, Earl Ray Neal, and I am tickled, as we say where I'm from, to have Mark Heidebrecht with us today. He is the co-founder and principal consultant for ErgoMethods. He's the managing partner for Ergonomics International. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing,
Good.
Earl Ray?
Well, doing the best. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule to do this with us. I know you speak, and we'll get into all that here in just a little bit. But Mark, I see that you. Well, first of all, if you're watching this and you've had one of his seminars, you may actually know him as Ergo Mark. So, as I understand it, is that right?
That is absolutely right. Yes,
That's
sir.
right. So, looks like you have your bachelor's and your master's in biomechanics and physiology from the University of Kansas. Is it Go Jayhawks?
Go Jayhawks.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my father-in-law was actually a Kansas grad, and I have his graduation ring, so that means a lot to me.
Oh,
He was
that's neat.
he was a very nice man. He loved the University of Kansas. You're certified in as a certified human factors professional in the Board of Certification in Professional Ergonomics. Also a certified exercise physiologist with the American College of Sports Medicine. And as we always do, we're just going to jump right in and start with the questions. And we really like to get to know you by asking if there's someone or something that sort of sent you down the path to a career in ergonomics.
Yeah. Originally, I was in school, my undergraduate, thinking I want to be a physical therapist, and went all through for it was a 5-year curriculum. Went through the entire curriculum, human dissection, whole thing, and did started doing my internships, and discovered that that really wasn't the career I wanted to spend my rest of my life in. And nothing to take away from that profession at all, but I found it just a little discouraging in that I was trying to rehab these people with these injuries. And the first thing I went to is in talking with them is how can we prevent them from occurring to begin with, rather than trying to fix it once it's happened. And I just happened to do an internship at a hospital in the return to work program. And so I got an introduction to ergonomics there. And then I started doing my final semester. I reached out to another hospital in Lawrence, Kansas, and did some internship and just volunteer work in their return to work program just to learn more about it. Then I had the difficult conversation with my parents that my in my senior year I wanted to change my major.
Bet that went over
And
well.
right. And but it wasn't changing it that much. And so I went and talked to my professor in biomechanics, Dr. Zebus, and told her what I was thinking, what I want to focus on. And she said, let's go talk to the dean. And went and talked to the dean, and they said, we don't have an ergonomic program, but we can certainly tailor your biomechanics curriculum around ergonomics. And so that's what I did with my master's degree.
Okay. Well, your work with Ergo Methods and Ergonomics International, it certainly had an influence on how many organizations approach ergonomics. So, talk a little bit about your original vision when you founded the company, and sort of where you are now.
Sure. I founded ergonomics. So I originally out of school, I worked in rehab a little bit, and then I landed in a consulting company, and I attribute a lot of my success to that, and that I was introduced to a lot of people that were very influential back in the 80s and 90s in ergonomics, and I was able to just learn a lot, just suck in that knowledge from all those people that kind of in those earlier days of ergonomics. And in with Ergonomics International and or I guess Ergo Online technically, was in 1998, and ErgoMethods I started in 1998. And it was one of the things I found myself, the company I was with went out of business, and there I was self-employed, and I really had no other choice. And so I started with one client doing office ergonomics and painted houses, and laid underground irrigation stuff for a summer as I gained clients and all that kind of stuff. And 26 years later, I guess I've made it. I don't know. I feel like I'm still
Well, that
trying.
you're certainly well respected in both the corporate and the academic worlds as it relates to ergonomics. So, talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, how you bridged those two areas in your career.
Yeah, so I've always just been very interested in maintaining my the current knowledge, not being comfortable with where I am, but I always want to learn a little bit more. So I've always um, tried to stay up on research. Um, One of my first introductions, I was asked by Bill Bruff, one of my, and Regina Barker, her niece, um, they asked me to attend Bruja, which was a small group of individuals. Half of that group was academia, half of that group were practitioners, and it was a really unique group in that everyone that attended was required to give a presentation, but you were only allowed about 10 to 15 minutes to talk, and then the rest of the hour was spent in discussion around that topic. And so, what it really allowed us to do was it wasn't about what I was saying, but it was about the discussion after what I said. And and the people that were in that group were, Don Bloswick and Richard Sessick and Sean Gallagher and Susan Rogers, and some of these just very influential people that I just really looked up to. And I saw the importance of academia needs the practitioner's guidance on what we need to know, and what problems we're trying to solve. And we need their information from a research perspective to do a better job with our clients. And it really is that synergistic um, combination that makes this process work. If we get too comfortable as practitioners that we know everything, we're really doing a disservice to our clients.
Well, our chief visionary officer, Steve Davis, is a memorable kind of a guy when you meet him. But I will never forget this. When I very first met Steve, he introduced himself as an ergonaut, and I go, What did you just say?" He goes, "I'm an ergonaut." I go, What are you talking about?" I'm thinking going into space, or I had no idea. I had no earthly idea what it was. So. Um, I always find it that there's so many persistent and difficult misconceptions about ergonomics. As an industry, what do you think are the most persistent and difficult misconceptions that people have of ergonauts?
Sure, sure. So I'm a consultant. I travel on any given year 30 to 36 weeks out of the year. So I'm always jumping on a plane to go somewhere. And it never fails. I sit down in my seat and the person next to me says, Hi. So what do you do? And I say, I'm an ergonomist. And the first thing they go to is, oh, you design chairs. Nope, never designed a chair in my life. Never plan to. Great for the people that do. We need those people, but no, that's not what I do. I don't adjust keyboard trays. I don't build chairs. But that's the first thing that people go to is office ergonomics. And there's a need for office ergonomics, but the field of ergonomics is so much broader than that. And one of the things that, well, Ergo Online started back in 1998 um, to help people prepare for the BCPE prep course for people that were trying to become board certified. It's a very difficult exam. Pass rate hovers right around 30%, 39%, somewhere in that range. And at the time, back in the mid 90s, late 90s, there was a push by some other organizations to develop their own certification because people were frustrated in that they were sitting for the exams and they weren't just not passing a little bit, they were not passing a lot. And so rather than go towards one of those other organizations, my business partner Sam Bradbury and I said, let's help develop a course to help people, mentor them through the process, help them to identify what are their strengths and weaknesses, what knowledge bases do they have, and what knowledge bases are their gaps, and then help them develop that study plan. In doing that, though, we've found that really there isn't one curriculum out there that prepares a person to sit for the BCP exam to become board certified, because you can get a degree in engineering, but then you're missing the cognitive psychology piece. You can get the degree in cognitive psychology, but then you're missing the engineering, the physiology, and the biomechanics. And I think that's the most challenging piece is that it's such a broad field. It's hard for a layperson to understand the whole scope of the profession.
So in all of your travels, I'm sure you come into contact with travels, with trends and technologies. What do you find to be the most disruptive or overrated trends or technologies in the ergonomic field today?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to try and stay off my soapbox.
Yeah,
Um,
well, that's okay.
the
It's your soapbox. You can talk, for another 10 minutes if you want about it. Fine. That could be the last question.
So, I think right now, and is the idea of being able to hold up a phone and capture some video, and voila, I have the answer that I need without really having to think through the process. It's and not to, I don't want to bash or discredit. I have colleagues that are working in that and developing that technology. I think the thing to point out is back in 1994, when I wrote my thesis, which was the biomechanics of lifting and lowering, using Dr. Chaffins from University of Michigan's his biomechanical model, looking at low back forces and finding out, we always hear about lift properly, but don't hear about lower properly. And physiologically, you actually, during an eccentric contraction, you have only 1/3 of the muscle fibers firing. And so there's actually more force per fiber during lowering. And so in my mind, I was like, well, there's actually a greater risk of injury doing that lowering activity as opposed to lifting. So let's talk about that. But, I used high-speed video back in 1994 with a computer, and I had floppy disk. I had, about 35 different floppy disk I had to use to put my thesis on. And so the technology of using motion capture isn't new. I had little markers on every joint point, and I put into the program Peak 5 motion analysis system, and it analyzed it middle stick figure. So the technology isn't new, it's just more accessible. The problem that I have is we're this more accessible technology now. We are plugging it into software or plugging it into computer systems that use an analysis process as it developed back in the 80s or 90s. We would never think about pulling out our Commodore computer and trying to write, a dissertation or thesis on that. Why are we still using the same analysis processes that were developed back in the 80s and 90s? Why haven't we upped our game and using better data? We've learned a lot in the past 20, 30 years about the development of musculoskeletal injuries, but we're still using some of the old tools, Rula, Reba, those types of things to produce our results. And that's my sticking point is let's up our game and use a better analysis process that's based on more of the data that we currently have.
Can you walk us through maybe, protecting the anonymity of your clients or your projects, but can you walk us through a project or a client story that sort of represents the type of impact that you want your ergonomics to make on society?
That's that's a very good question. So a couple. One, I get a lot of joy from working with the people out on the shop floor when I see a light bulb go off and click with them, because they're the ones doing the hard work.
And you know
And
what? In today's world, they're one injury away from bankruptcy.
you are absolutely right. Yeah,
And that's why we preach at Ergonauts so often that a little bit of investment on the front end for the company in their workers protects not just the worker but also the company, because good
yeah,
workers are hard to find.
absolutely,
Yeah. So I didn't mean
absolutely.
to interrupt you, but yeah,
No,
that's a
no,
big. I mean, that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess one example, I'll give a second one here, that's more of a management success. But from a line worker perspective, where the rubber's hitting the road, and this goes back to Gary Orr with OSHA that was one of my mentors back in early 2000s. I worked with Gary in the rollout of the ergonomic process for the U.S. Postal Service. And a lot of the other ergonomists were working in the plants and things like that. And I did that some, but my task was developing that same type of process for the carriers, which is a very unique industry in that they're autonomous. They're working on their own most of the day. And so it's difficult. It's not like going to a plant and saying, okay, you all get together and let's talk about something, because carriers are going out all over the city. And I was teamed up with a letter carrier, Bill McCullough. I'm still friends with Bill today. He'd been working as a letter carrier for 20 years. And we were up in Syracuse, New York, rolling out our little 1 hour training that we did. And one of the things that we'd identified as an opportunity for the post office was for the letter carriers were reaching in the back of their vehicles to pull that tray of letters out, pull it close. One, it put some stress on the shoulder and the back, but two, up in Syracuse, New York, you have ice on the ground a lot of the time. And so they're having lots of knee knockers and shin knockers with those letter carriers getting that center of gravity shifted out, and then their legs sliding out and hitting their shins and knees. And we were up in Syracuse, and one of the letter carriers up there came up afterwards and said, I hurt my shoulder a few years ago. My son, he's a metal fabricator. He welded me this tool. And all it was a brown piece of metal with a triangle handle on it with a little tip that went like this. Because I use that, and he pulled it over to us and reached over. And he said, I use that to just grab it and pull it to me. So that's a genius. And so Bill and I said, hey, can your son make us some? So he started making those up. We started handing them around to different parts in the around upstate New York. And one of the letter carriers would always go back after I handed them out and say, how do you like it? And this is around December or so. And for the first time, a letter carrier said, you can have it back. Well, why don't you like it? And he said, it's all rusty. Well, snow started to fall, there was water on it, and so it started to rust. And we said, okay, but good idea. We tried dipping it in rubber, all kinds of stuff. And we're up in Glens Falls, and one of the carriers up there said, well, why don't you use a boat hook? I said, I don't know. I don't have a boat. What's your boat hook look like? You brought it to work the next day. It was a aluminum shaft, bicycle handle, a little tip on it. Wouldn't rust. We started buying boat hooks at the marina. And then one of the letter carriers using a 2-ton said, well, it's too short for me, so we got a telescoping one. But the point is, those workers were able to engage and take what we had that little nugget of information that we gave them and apply that to what issue they were having and solve their own problems. And that's just rewarding when you're able to just not throw a tool at someone and say, here, go use it,
Here, go
but let
use it.
them come up with the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you had another story about at the management level, you said?
Yeah. And so I was in I spent a lot of time in meat processing and food processing in general. And I was up there, and Jose, the plant manager, he was one of the few plant managers that had me on his own phone. He wouldn't go through safety. He would just send me a text and say, hey, Ergo Mark, it's Jose. I need you up in Sioux City. And so I call him up and say, what's going on? He goes, well, we have this issue. We identified it years ago, but now we need to do something about it. And what it was they have these racks of brisket. So this is one of those meat processing plants that smells delicious because it's just smoked meat. Okay. But they have to take these racks off of the top level and put them down, then use this big spatula so they can put it in these little pockets. And he says, we know it's bad, but how bad is it? And that's where, a lot of the older assessment tools put something in a red, yellow, green zone or something like that. And Jose said, I need to know how bad it is because I need to cost justify this change. I have some ideas, but how bad is it? And so through the software we use, which is based on epidemiology research, and we use odds ratios, and the odds ratios tell you the risk of an injury above that of the normal population. So you don't have to work at a meat processing plant, an auto plant, an aircraft manufacturing facility to have a rotator cuff tear. That occurs in a population at a given rate. And so when I go into a plant, my job is to find out, do you have risk factors that increase that risk above that of the normal population? And so with Jose, we're able to look at that and said, okay, shoulder flexion has an odd ratio of this. And the thing that I learned, and this is why I find it rewarding, is because I learned that this motion here, supination, pronation, is a forearm movement. But once you extend your arm out into flexion, that becomes a rotator cuff movement.
Okay.
And so this posture here, shoulder flexion, supinated, what was the increased risk of an injury? 1,270% increased risk. Has an odd ratio of 13.7. And so Jose, now that you put that in terms of odds, is no different than sitting down at a poker table. I'm not a good poker player, but if I was, I'd want to know what my odds are with the hand that I'm holding. And so you're able to make an educated decision. And Jose was able to say, yeah, that's not a risk I'm willing to take.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend this money to fix it. And so by fixing it, we were able to calculate what the decreased risk was. We decreased the risk 130%.
Well, you're like me, been around your profession for a minute. Today's not your first day. And so I always like to know, what advice that because there's going to be this 19-year-old watching this that's typed in, Googled ergonomics or got on Chat GPT and, asked, is there any podcast that talks about ergonomics and this is going to come up. So what do you say to that kid?
First of all, learn about the profession, ask multiple people that are in the industry about it, and find a mentor. And that was advice I helped raise five kids, and I told all my kids the same thing. Find a mentor out there in the field. And if someone doesn't want to mentor you, then that tells me they're probably not very confident in what they're doing. But most professionals out there are not going to see, if they're confident in their profession and their knowledge base, not going to see it as a threat or they can steal business from them. To find a mentor and mentor them. I had numerous mentors, and I really attribute where I am today to those individuals.
And
And
the last question is always my favorite. Okay. What do you hope your legacy will be?
I'm sorry.
What do you hope your legacy in the
Oh
ergonomic
gosh,
community will
yeah.
be?
To better the field, to help make the field better and maybe alleviate some of the stigmas out there about ergonomics. Because back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was the connotation. I testified at the OSHA hearing for the ergonomic standard, where the big phrase was ergonomics isn't science. Well, it is science. It's actually multiple sciences. And I hope that I better the field and help people understand the scientific basis around ergonomics, both the cognitive as well as the musculoskeletal physical piece.
Well, I and our listeners are much better for the time that we have spent with you today. It's been enlightening. I've really enjoyed it, Mark.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Heidebrecht. He is the co-founder and principal consultant for ErgoMethods and the managing partner of Ergonomics International. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you. Feel free to, come back and visit with us anytime something happens in your travels that you want to tell us about, or if you have a new idea or product that you want to promote, feel free to reach out to our Chief Visionary Officer, Steve, and he'll get you right back on here. So we really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Earl Ray. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. And folks, as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave those down at the bottom. Also, you can email us. don't be surprised if Ergonaut Steve doesn't email you back, because we're a growing company, but we're small enough where our chief visionary officer still answers his own emails, much to the chagrin of some of us sometimes. Him and technology, the computer part of it can be challenging, as it is with me too. Matter of fact, I'm hamstrung right now with my Ergonaut email. So again, thank you for your time. I just want to remind you to be good to each other, and we'll see you next time on Atomic Ergo.